ultimate goal here is we want to write about women who are notable, but aren't represented on Wikipedia. Unfortunately, we have this problem on Wikipedia where there are notable women who should be represented on Wikipedia, who should have articles written about them for their contributions, but they don't because nobody's written them. And that, it could be argued it's because there aren't enough female editors, or it's because people are working on other things, or it's also because, maybe people don't know about them as much because they're not mentioned in the press as much. So the goal here, after learning how to edit and create articles, is to create those articles about those women. That way people can learn more about them and their work, and so that people know them. We have here in our country, the New York Times is doing a series where they're writing obituaries about women in history who did make contributions to society up to 100 years ago, but because they were women, they didn't have obituaries in the New York Times, which is the largest, arguably the most read and largest newspaper in the United States. So what they're doing now is they're writing obituaries about these women and publishing them now. The reason I mention this is because that makes for a really great source when citing information that you're adding to Wikipedia, because now we have the New York Times publishing all of this information about these women. Because if we go to try to find it even a few months ago or anything else published about these women, it's really hard because even though they were making contributions, nobody was writing about them. That, unfortunately, to this day is one of the trickiest parts about creating articles about women. If newspapers are not reporting on their accomplishments, if notable blogs or websites are not talking about them, if they're not being published or people are not publishing about them, I should say, in materials, then we don't have that much to cite. So it's really up to us to find the citations that talk about, or find the materials or the sources that talk about these women, so that when we do write the article, we can cite that source. Okay, I'm going to scroll through some other questions here. Good question. So there's a question about, are there any rules against being paid to write Wikipedia articles? There are writers out there who offer wiki writing services. It is highly, highly frowned upon to be a paid Wikipedia editor. I can find the policies, the actual written policy on it, and put it in the event page. On the spot, I can't remember exactly what the policy is called, and I wouldn't be able to search it right away, but I will include it on the event page. If you are a paid editor, they do ask you to disclose it using that user page that we did discuss very early in the presentation. But we ask you to refrain from paid editing, though at the same time, we know that it does happen, and if you're going to do it, then it needs to be disclosed. The Wikipedia community is aware that there are paid Wikipedia editors out there. They do operate within the Wikipedia world, but it is not something that we recommend be done. There was, I think, a question that was a good one that I missed. Okay, there was someone asked a question about if an article is locked, or it says only certain editors can edit it, what can be done about that? So for articles that have had a lot of vandalism, which of course can, in many cases, can be for politicians or people in the news or celebrities or controversial topics, for example, sometimes the articles are locked, or partially protected or fully protected. So when something is protected, you need to be what's called a confirmed user to edit them. Now, in many cases, confirmed user means that you just need to have that 4 days or 10 edits under your belt in order to edit that content. All you would need to do is just make sure you're confirmed, and you should be able to click and edit it. Some of them are more restricted to editings, and you can actually click on the options that it says, this is restricted. You can click on the hyperlink and it'll explain to you what to do. But just know that, just because something is partially restricted doesn't mean that you can't necessarily edit it. It just means you need to be a confirmed user, which basically means just a more experienced editor. We have a question here. Do you need to be an editor before you actually can be a writer? They're one and the same. It's sort of this Wikipedia terminology that an editor is a writer on Wikipedia. So once you create a username, you are an editor, Wikipedia editor, you are a writer, you're a contributor, all the same. So I'm going to scroll. Okay, great. I'm glad that answered the question. I'm going to scroll through and make sure there's no other questions I missed, and then open it up in the chat to more questions. Okay. If I don't see anything here, I'm going to navigate back to the Wiki event page and show you a few things, including Women in Red. Again, immediately after the presentation, I will upload my slides to the event page, so you'll have them immediately. Just have to find the presentation. Here we go. So here's our event page. Now I do know we are discussing and doing a collaborative edit-a-thon. Now, after our typical editing training sessions, which is more like what this is, edit-a-thons are a set period of time where we work together. It's usually, you know, in regular circumstances, we're together in a room and we do this all together at the same time. In many cases, we're working with librarians or university professionals or so forth to help us, you know, find materials about people or things. But because we're doing this remotely, what we would do is come together remotely via Zoom or something else, sit together and edit together and ask questions as we go. We would typically have a list of articles we would like to create or edit and work on them together. So that's ultimately the goal of the second portion of this, where we will actually have an edit-a-thon. Of course, you are always more than welcome to you don't have to wait for the edit-a-thon. You can start editing right away. As soon as you have a username, you can really just get in there, start editing and create it. So within this Wiki event page, you'll see a section called Wiki Projects. Wiki projects are basically, just as they seem, projects of like-minded people who come together with the goal of improving Wikipedia about certain topics, or the project has a particular goal in mind. Well, Women in Red is one of the, we have something in the chat here. Okay. Yep. Women definitely are working together. The comment about it being amazing that women are working together for women, and it is. It's really a great project. So Wikipedia, Wiki Project Women in Red was actually founded by one of our board members, Rosie Stevenson Goodnight, who we know that Mawish actually had a chance to connect with, and that's sort of how we came together to present this presentation. So she founded this project, and the reason it's called Women in Red, if you remember when we were creating articles in draft form and regular form, when you try to create an article or work on an article that doesn't exist, you are presented with something called a red link. That means that the article does not exist. Well, unfortunately, because of the Wikipedia gender gap, if I were to type a notable woman's name into the search bar, a lot of the time, or much of the time, I'll get the option to say, oh, here's your red link to create that article, because no one has yet taken the time to create it and it doesn't exist on Wikipedia. So she created, they have this pun called Women in Red, of a list of all articles that should be created but haven't yet been created. So one of the great things about this talk page is it talks about the work that they're doing, some of the projects they're working on. And when I say they, it's really anybody can join this project. You can join this project. You can work with them, or you can work more independently. It's totally up to you how much you want to engage. But this is something, a really great project. So if you ever want to see just a list of notable women separated by profession, nationality, and so forth, you could go to this link, which is in the event page, click on the red link index, and it's going to show you a list by occupation. It's going to show you, in many cases, by country of citizenship, geography, nationality, ethnicity, time period. And if I'll pick one, for example. Let's see, I'm actually curious.
Let's pick Pakistan.
Yeah, let's see. Here we go. Okay. So you'll see here it says WD. That means that this list was not crowdsourced, but it was sourced from Wikidata, which is the online database. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And you'll see here's a list of women who should have Wikipedia articles but don't. So if you're ever looking for inspiration, and I know we'll probably have a more curated list of women whose articles we want to create, or maybe we'll be looking at this list for the next portion of our, when we do meet up again to have an edit-a-thon. But I do encourage you, if you happen to have the urge to create articles about some of these women, you can do so. Now, let's say if I just click on, it's funny, there's a lot of models on here. I'm looking for like a scientist or something. Okay. Okay, we have a journalist, for example. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and click on her name, and right away I get her page, a blank page, and I could just build it right off the bat. That's all you need to do. And of course, use the methods that we discussed earlier by starting with the lead paragraphs and then doing early life and education, then career, and then if she's published, you can put a list of things that she's published and so forth. But that's a really great way to find a list. And of course, you can always add to these lists if you know of other people. So at this point, I do want to acknowledge, do know that it's a lot of information. Wikipedia editing is one of those things that the more you do it, the easier it gets. I am not an IT professional. I was not even a communications professional. I am more into arts and humanities programming, specifically in what we call our nonprofit world, more of an community service world here. And I worked with a lot of museums and libraries and archives and organizations and government agencies before taking this job. And one of the reasons why they engaged me to help train other people is because I had a lot of connections within that world to help people who know about things, subject matter experts, to edit and create things on Wikipedia. So it's been a really exciting experience. The reason that I mention that is because I'm not experienced with Wikipedia, but I'm at the point now where I edit quite frequently and can teach other people how to edit. So if it is daunting or intimidating at first, please try not to let it discourage you. Please keep editing. If you have any issues, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to put my email in the chat. Okay, and there is a question on photos. Okay, so it says, so adding photos of these people will, without their consent, and who else has the authority? So I don't, here in the United States, I don't know the laws of Pakistan, but I know here in the United States, you are, in most cases, able to take, in a public setting, a photo of somebody. As long as you are taking the photo, you can upload it, even though it's a photo of them. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so don't quote me on this. If it's a photo of them that's taken in a public place where there's a reasonable expectation that they will be photographed, it typically can be uploaded without their consent. That, again, I don't know rules, international rules on that, but that is the case here. Yes, you do not need to ask to upload a photo. So for example, if we have a celebrity or a politician or a journalist here and I have a photo of them that was taken at a public event, I can upload it. One of the interesting things, though, about Wikipedia, if you look at somebody who's relatively famous, in many cases, the photo associated with them won't necessarily be a good photo. The photo on their, I should say, Wikipedia article won't be a good photo because it was just taken by some random person who was at an event with them, a public event with them. It wasn't necessarily taken by a publicist or a professional photographer, because in order to add it to Wikipedia, you need to release the rights to that photo. And many, of course, professional photographers, understandably, are not going to release the rights to their work. That is a very good question. And I would refer to your own laws just to be sure, your own country's laws just to be sure. But I do know you don't need to ask permission in the States to upload somebody's photo as long as it's taken with your camera. The photo is your property and it is in a public setting. So I'm going to go ahead and put my email. I think you all have it from the Zoom link, but into the chat. And I will work over the next few weeks or so with Mawish, and we can come up and find out what date we want to do for the Edit-A-Thon, maybe come up with a list of articles that we want to edit together. And I do encourage you, you don't have to wait for that day. You can start editing right away and really get into it.
Ariel,
So
are we done with the slides? Can we open the floor now, if so that if anybody still has a question or a query or any